This video recording is about how to write concisely. So when you're doing your research reports and your essays, you'll be able to write nice, clear paragraphs and keep within the word counts. So what I'm going to be showing you in this video is an example of a wordy paragraph and how it can be written more concisely. It's sometimes hard to identify the wordiness in your own writing, but using the tips and advice on Redbook on how to write concisely, we're going to fix up this paragraph here. So you can see this paragraph is looks quite long. It's a paragraph about flow, and it should be able to be read by anyone after editing it, and it should be able to make sense. At this point, I don't think if you read it, it would make sense, but we're going to use some of the Redbook tips on how to write concisely now. And we'll go through each sentence and identify the wordiness within it. So you can see at the moment that the word count for this paragraph is 175 words. So we're going to check our word count again at the end to see if we've reduced the number of words, because this is important for your assignments to keep within the word limits. You want to be able to write within the word limits to avoid penalties. And let's start with the first sentence. In positive psychology, flow is a state of consciousness where focusing very intensely on an activity results in becoming completely absorbed in it. So what we have in here is we actually have two qualifiers and intensifiers. And what these are words that they're just describing the word after it. So very intensely, completely absorbed. But if we read this sentence again without those words in there, the sentence would probably make more sense than if we leave them in there. So in positive psychology, flow is a state of consciousness where focusing intensely on an activity results in becoming absorbed in it. So you can see without those words, the sentence still makes sense, if not more sense, by just being simpler. So let's delete those two words. So got rid of those qualifiers and intensifiers. And let's move on to the second sentence. So Csikszentmihalyi is the positive psychologist best known as the architect of the concept of flow. So this sounds nice and fancy here, known as the architect of the concept of flow. But really what we have a phrase that could be simplified into a word or two to make the sentence easy to read. So Csikszentmihalyi is the positive psychologist who defined the concept of flow. So let's change that. And we just took a phrase and made it simple by reducing it to a word or two. Let's move on. Flow is three conditions: clear goals, immediate feedback, and challenge skills balance. And when these do not occur, flow will not arise. So the first part of that sentence is fine. Flow is three conditions, and then those three conditions are described in brackets. But this second part has negatives in it, negative statements. When these do not occur, flow will not arise. And if we change these into affirmative statements by taking out the negatives, if we said, and when these occur, flow will arise, then it still makes sense, if not more sense. So let's delete them. Delete these negative statements. And when these occur, flow will arise. There we go. So many researchers have shown flow occurs during leisure activities and work when the task is perceived to have intrinsic value. But this word at the start here, again, it's another qualifier and intensifier. It's saying, lots of researchers have shown flow occurs. But by saying researchers, we're saying, more than one group of researchers. So it's fine just to start the sentence with researchers. So instead of many researchers, just have researchers have shown flow occurs during leisure activities and work when the task is perceived to have intrinsic value. Therefore, the occurrence of flow is heavily reliant upon a person's motivation to complete a task. So now I want you to read that sentence, and I want you to identify the qualifier and intensifier in this sentence. So have a read. So if you identified the word heavily as the qualifier and intensifier, you're right. Flow is reliant upon a person's motivation. We don't need to say it's heavily Reliant. We don't need to describe how reliant it is. So delete the word heavily. And now let's continue on to some other tips in here. So in addition to this, focused attention is also quintessential for flow to occur. Even though that sentence is short, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So this very first opening phrase could be simplified into one word. We're flowing on essentially from the last sentence. We're saying, in addition to this, furthermore, additionally, moreover. We can just use one word as opposed to using a phrase. So let's change in addition to this to furthermore. Furthermore, focused attention is also quintessential for flow to occur. Even though I love the word quintessential, it's a great word when used appropriately, it's an inflated word. So sometimes simple words convey ideas more concisely. So we could replace quintessential with necessary to be able to describe that focused attention is also necessary for flow to occur. So let's change that to necessary just to make the sentence simpler. So next sentence. It has been suggested by Csikszentmihalyi that individuals with specific personality traits experience flow more often than others. So it's quite a long sentence, and it's because we're using the passive voice in this opening section here. So what we actually are looking for is using an active writing style where the person performing the action, their name comes first. We actually have the action first, so suggested. So we want to put the person's name at the start and then the action following. So let's move Csikszentmihalyi to the start. Csikszentmihalyi suggested that individuals with, is there still a space there? Yep. Suggested that individuals with specific personality traits experience flow more often than others. And by doing that, it makes a sentence more direct by changing it to the active writing style instead of using a passive voice. Moving on, people with these traits are generally thought of as having an autotelic personality. So the sentence sounds fine, but we can just make it a little bit more concise by taking out, there's a phrase in here, generally thought of. We can reduce this phrase to one word. People with these traits are described as having an autotelic personality. So let's replace that phrase with a word. So you can see, even though some of these sentences are fine the way they are, if we're just making them that little bit more concise, they'll be easier for someone else to read and absorb the content, because it might be okay for you to read, and you might not be finding it wordy, but as soon as someone else reads the sentence, they might not be able to absorb what you're saying. Okay, let's finish this off. Flow is also associated with producing the cream of the crop in sports. So the cream of the crop is a cliche, and cliches reduce the impact of your writing. So instead of using a cliche, it's best just to write what you actually want to say. What we're actually wanting to say here is that flow is associated with producing the best sports people, or producing better sporting performance. So let's write that. Flow is also associated with enhanced sporting performance. And you see we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words here that we're going to change into enhanced sporting performance. 3 words. Says the same thing, but it's just clearer. Flow is also associated with enhanced sporting performance. It is thought that more research is required to determine whether flow can aid performance in other areas, including the performing arts. This first part here is what we call an expletive. It is thought that. So an expletive is something, it's words without meaning. It's not adding to the sentence. It's not adding something that will further explain the sentence to the reader. So we delete that completely as opposed to having it there, and just start the sentence with more research is required to determine whether flow can aid performance in other areas, including the performing arts. So now our paragraph is down to 146 words, whereas before, I'm pretty sure it was over 170. So reduce it down, between 20 and 30 words, which is sometimes the difference in going over a word count or not. But in addition to the word count, we've actually improved on the clarity of the writing within the paragraph too. So I would also recommend for you to reread your paragraph after editing it using the tips from Redbook on how to write more concisely, because sometimes you'll make an adjustment, but you've made a mistake along the way.